reason that I joined the police straight from university was because I really wanted to make a difference. And I just felt like I wasn't making that difference. You know, what I was doing was I was part of that cycle of almost street sweeping. I felt I was doing. I was a street sweeper. You know, I was picking these people up, putting them before the court, and then I knew I was going to see them again. For me, work is such an important part of my life. I love going to work. I love doing a job. I love having that purpose. And I knew that I needed that. I knew that I needed that in a way that I didn't have anymore.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks so much for agreeing to be interviewed for the Blue Light Leavers podcast. It's really good of you. And we actually only connected fairly recently via LinkedIn. And I came across one of your posts, and it was just so engaging. It was fantastic. And obviously we connected and got chatting through there. So it's lovely to connect with you. And thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's a real pleasure. And I think it's a great initiative. So really pleased to be part of it today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, what is it that you're currently doing? What's your current role?
Okay, so currently I am the founder of an organisation called Safer Together. So I'm a freelance consultant. We provide consultancy and training for a range of sectors that are involved in the safeguarding of children, predominantly children. We do some work around safeguarding adults as well, but most of our work is focused on the safeguarding agenda for children and young people, and also those children and young people who have got special educational needs and disabilities. So I am commissioned currently by Coventry and Warwickshire CCG as a project manager. So I've been doing some consultancy and project management for a child exploitation project, which is looking at child exploitation across the Coventry and Warwickshire footprint. I'm also commissioned by Hereford and Worcestershire CCG to do some safeguarding work with their primary care partners, which is predominantly actually focused on adult safeguarding. So that's really interesting to have the two different hats on. And then in addition to that, I'm an independent reviewer. So I undertake child safeguarding practice reviews, formerly known as serious case reviews. So we do all manner of consultancy reviews and training really related to safeguarding.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And for anyone that might not know, what is actually a CCG, just in case people aren't
So it's a clinical commissioning group. So a CCG essentially is responsible for the commissioning of all healthcare for the area that they cover. So for the CCG that I work with, predominantly, that's healthcare and services across Coventry and Warwickshire.
Okay, thank you for that. And so your previous history, your career history, if we go back to 2004.
Yeah, so that's when I began policing in 2004. I joined West Midlands Police, which seems like a really long time ago, but actually still seems like yesterday as well. When I look back, it feels like it's just been a whirlwind since 2004. Done lots of different roles, a variety of different roles. Feel like I've had lots of different lives since then.
Amazing. Yes. So talk us through what you're doing in the police, and then we'll go on to your rationale for why you wanted to leave.
So I had quite a varied career in the police. So did response policing, neighbourhood policing, which I absolutely loved neighbourhood policing. I think when I look back, that was one of my favourite roles I ever had. I also worked in offender management. I was co-located with a youth offender team, where I had responsibility for the most prolific young offenders, so managing them on licence in my role as offender manager. And I absolutely loved that role. I think for me, that was quite pivotal as to why I left policing, because of that role. Because I was working in that really multi-agency collaborative way, I had that insight into the way that other organisations worked, which I probably would never have had if I hadn't have been co-located. Because I think until that point, actually, when I was in other roles within the police, it's quite a siloed way of working and such a unique way of working. So this really opened my eyes to sort of other career opportunities. And one of the things as well in that role, I felt quite frustrated, a little bit disenfranchised with it actually, because I think for me, I was working with some of these young people who were incredibly complex, incredibly vulnerable. And my role essentially was to keep putting them back before the court and getting them back into custody if they were breaching their licence conditions. And I think for me, having the time to understand them as young people who had experienced quite traumatic childhoods in the majority of cases that I was dealing with, I could see that sort of binary view of victim and offender, good and bad, it just felt really difficult and alien for me the more I worked in that setting. And that's when I started to think about the real reasons why I joined the police. So the real reasons that I joined the police was to make a difference. So I was fresh out of university, really naive, green behind the ears. I think when I joined the police, it really felt like the first time that I saw the world in Technicolor, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And it was like somebody had turned all the lights on and I saw the world for all of the complexities in the world that I was probably shielded from, when I was growing up. So yeah, I think that the reason that I joined the police straight from university was because I really wanted to make a difference. I did psychology and criminology at university, was really interested in sort of societal constructs and why things happen the way that they do. And I just felt like I wasn't making that difference. What I was doing was I was part of that cycle of almost street sweeping. I felt I was doing. I was a street sweeper. I was picking these people up, putting them before the court, and then I knew I was going to see them again. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to actually feel that I was ending the working day feeling like I'd made a difference. And that's part of the reason that I left professionally. That was the reason why I left. This was also around the time I think that we were seeing a lot of the cuts and a lot of the changes to policing were coming in. And it honestly felt, looking back, like my experience of policing just changed overnight. Those cuts were absolutely catastrophic to policing. And I think that will resonate with a lot of people that were policing around the same time that I was. Things like, being single crewed. You would never be single crewed on a night shift. All of a sudden you were. And just the negativity in the workplace because officers were quite frankly burnt out with doing a job that was already really difficult to do, but doing that job when you are incredibly under-resourced. The impact of that is huge. And I think that we're seeing that now, those cracks that started to emerge, as I say, almost overnight, and now these huge, great chasms, and it's really difficult to know how to start and piece that back together. So that was really my professional reasons for leaving policing. But then personally as well, I've got a young family. My eldest son was young at the time, and that kind of fear of missing birthdays, because things like your leave and the time that you got in the book, you could never take that back. I remember kind of the Birmingham riots happening and everything getting cancelled, and that's part of the job in many ways. It is part of the job, but at the same time, when you've got a young family, the guilt that comes with that, that mum guilt that I had was really hard. And I think that when I felt like actually I'm doing this job and I'm not making a difference that I really wanted to make, and then it's impacting on my family life, for me, that kind of like led me down that path of thinking this probably isn't for me anymore. And I remember I worked with this really great sergeant. He was lovely. And he always used to tease me a little bit and say, "You care too much, you're in the wrong job, you are." And I just remember turning around to him one day and saying, "Do you know what? You're right, I am." And I think he thought that was sort of like tongue in cheek, but the cogs were going in my head at this point, and I just knew that I was on that sort of trajectory out of policing.
And how long do you think you were thinking about it for, Nikki, in terms of that first sort of, actually, I'm not sure I want to be doing this anymore, to going to 2012, when it was actually when you put your papers in?
Subconsciously, I think I was probably thinking about it for quite a long time, but I would say as well that there was this culture then of the police that I'm not sure it's as pervasive as it is, or as it was then now. But it was almost kind of like, you've signed up for 30 years and you've got to do your 30 years. There's nothing out there. If you're in policing, you're never going to find another job like this, or you're never going to fit into another kind of organisation. And so I think that I was kind of trying to sort of silence some of those thoughts in my head a little bit.
Mm.
So in terms of consciously thinking about leaving, I would say that those conscious thoughts wasn't particularly there for long before I left. And I wouldn't say I'm an impulsive person. I think I'm quite a cautious person, but actually, I think there's quite a few people that would disagree with me there, because I seemed to make that decision one day, just woke up and thought, that's it. And I'd spoken to my husband and I told him kind of thoughts about maybe leaving. But it was literally a case of I went to work one day, nothing bad happened. I didn't have a bad day. It wasn't a day out of the ordinary. But I just went, spoke to my sergeant, my inspector, and said, I'm just letting you know I'm putting my ticket in. And they kind of like laughed. And I said, no, I am. And they sort of said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know yet, but I know that I need to do this. So I did that, went home, told my husband I'd resigned from the police. My inspector came around the house to try and talk me out of it.
Wow.
Yeah, said, where's all this come from? Has something happened? I was like, no, not particularly. I just feel that this isn't for me. And for me, work is such an important part of my life. I love going to work. I love doing a job. I love having that purpose. And I knew that I needed that. I knew that I needed that in a way that I didn't have anymore. People thought I was mad, and maybe that something had happened behind the scenes that I'd not spoken about. And that wasn't the case at all. It was just that I knew that it wasn't working for me. So it was a bit of a panic at home of like, what on earth are you doing? But yeah, very quickly I identified that there was a role for me working in a young person substance misuse service, and that's where Compass came in. And I'd already been working with them really closely, because obviously a lot of the cohort of young people that I was working with had got those really entrenched substance misuse issues. So yeah, I mentioned to them that I was leaving policing, and they kind of said, "Oh, there's a role. Would you be interested?" And I
Wow.
said, "Yeah, potentially." And I thought, I've probably not got the skill set for this at all, because it's quite a niche sort of area working in substance misuse. But I just went for it. I got the job. Within 6 months, I was a service manager, and I don't think I've looked back since, really.
Incredible. And it just goes to show, doesn't it? I know I rattle on about this all the time, boring people with it, but a lot of the time it really is who you know, and it's developing those relationships. It's
Yeah,
what's seen as a dirty word in police, but networking, and which is again why LinkedIn is so important. We'll go on to that as well. But it's yeah, a lot of the time these opportunities come up as a result of relationships that you have and that you've developed in your current role, and people who you know. So it is so important. But something I'd just like to pick up on, excuse me, is you said, you felt that you didn't have those, maybe the skill set for this particular role. So
yeah.
how did you then realize when you got through to the sort of interview stage and, that mindset of actually this could be a really good fit? Can you remember the what were those skills that you felt and the experience that you had? How did they map across to this particular role?
Do you know, it's really interesting, and it probably was during the interview process that I realised how many transferable skills that I'd got,
Mm.
and just how resilient policing makes you as a person, or can make you as a person, and how attractive that is actually to employers. I've always found actually that with every role that I've ever gone for, I feel that employers have looked favourably on me because of my experience in policing, because of the discipline, because of all of the different situations that you're exposed to, because of the personable skills that you develop, because you are talking, or you have to be able to talk to all kinds of cohorts of people, and you have to understand that complex vulnerability. And I think that you have an insight into a society that maybe you wouldn't have from any other job, that lends itself so well to all sorts of disciplines. Um, so I would say that actually, I went to the interview. I wasn't particularly hopeful, even though that, as you say, I've got that relationship with that organisation. And I definitely echo everything you say there. I think that for me, transitioning from the police, finding another job was relatively easily, because I'd worked in that multi-agency setting, and I've built those relationships. And that is probably advice that I would give anybody, is network.
Mm.
If you're kind of thinking that maybe this isn't going to be a 30-year career, think about developing those networks, and just open your eyes to the opportunities that might be out there, that might take your interest, and never doubt your ability to transfer the skills that you've got into a new role in a new setting. Because I found that a lot of the skills that I had in the police have really served me well.
No, I completely agree. I'm in the same. And even if I'm now working in IT, and so I now work for an online sort of fashion retailer, and sort of global. I'm sorry, a bit of a cough. And it is remarkable, really. I was a few years ago sort of running around with a gun and a dog and all that sort of stuff, and now working in IT, and even despite what I did, I'm still seen as being able to manage and do a role that is so completely polar opposite from where I was. So I think it's really important not to let that mindset of this is all I know and this is all I can do, therefore I'm stuck here for 30 years or 35 years plus now. It's so important not to think that way. But it's almost everyone I speak to is very entrenched in this mindset of this is all I know, this is all I can do. And I think it's really important that we try and break that cycle, really, and get out of that.
Definitely. And I think it's about adaptability, isn't it? If you think about policing, day-to-day role in policing, regardless of what department you work for or what rank you hold, you have to be adaptable every day. You can go from a burglary to potentially a murder to a serious sexual offence that's been committed, and you have to adapt at lightning speed to be able to manage those situations. And if you think that that's an inherent part of being a police officer, that adaptability and that flexibility, that's a huge asset for any organisation or any employer. So that's, again, something that I think that we need to be mindful of as ex-police officers, that we are incredibly adaptable.
Yeah, 100%. How did you feel that first interview?
Do you know, it's interesting. I felt a weight had been lifted almost. I didn't necessarily know that I got the job. I don't necessarily think it was a brilliant interview that I gave, but I just knew that I'd done the right thing. I never had a moment of thinking, oh God, what have I done? I really haven't. Did I think I would have? Yeah. And I'm not going to say that I didn't have any sleepless nights over it, thinking, God, will I get a job? But I think when I sat in that interview, I just knew. And I always remember the day that I gave my kit back, all my public order kit and all of that. And there was a moment of kind of like sadness of it's an end of an era, but I always knew that, if I wanted to go back to this, I could. And, I see all the time that West Midlands Police are looking for rejoiners and other forces are looking for rejoiners. And I knew that option was always there. And I think that in this role, particularly because of obviously managing that project and looking at child exploitation, I almost feel like I've gone back to policing in some ways, because I'm working really closely with police colleagues again, some that I actually worked with when I was a frontline officer, which is really lovely and bizarre at the same time. But yeah, I always knew that I could go back to it. It never felt final because of that. But at the same time, I sort of knew that I wouldn't, if that makes sense. It just felt from the off that I'd made the right decision. And for me, trusting those kind of nagging doubts and that gut instinct was the right thing to do.
And then from there, you moved on to a role with Care Quality Commission.
Yeah, so I was a service manager for the Young Person Substance Misuse Service in Warwickshire. Did that role for a number of years, absolutely loved it, built a team, developed lots of different care pathways. And we were inspected by the Care Quality Commission. And for anybody that doesn't know much about that organisation, they are effectively the Ofsted of healthcare. So they're a regulatory body, come and do all different types of inspections and reviews. We were inspected, and some of the pathways that we created in our service was identified as an example of practice that should be replicated nationally. So that was a really nerve-wracking but really positive experience. And one of the inspectors that was leading the inspection said, you should think about joining the CQC or the Care Quality Commission as an inspector. There's a job coming up. And I found the job, filled out the application, thought, yeah, it sounds interesting, because obviously, again, thinking about those transferable skills, those investigative skills lend themselves really well to that kind of regulatory role. So applied and went through the whole process, had my interview leads, got the role, absolutely brilliant, loved it. It was a national role. And interestingly, on our team, a real skill set, there was a couple of police officers, ex-police officers that were then inspectors. So again, sort of those skills came in really handy, being able to be really analytical, process that complex information at a really fast pace, and then come up with a conclusion of what that means. Those interview skills, those sort of soft skills that you develop as well, really came in handy. And yeah, so that was a brilliant role. And I felt, again, really grateful for my policing career, because I felt that it really stood me in good stead.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's a few members of the group actually that work for the CQC as well, so which is great. And again, they speak very highly of it. And one of them is so Helly has also been a previous podcast guest as well. So yeah, it seems like a really good place to be. And exactly as you say, it's moving into those regulatory bodies as well is a really good fit for many. So that's great advice. What happened from there?
So I did that role for just over 3.5 years, and it was a national role. It was a tough gig, actually. Great job. I feel like for me, it just was a brilliant opportunity for lots of learning. For me as well, I think it really sort of helped with sort of confidence, being in a national role and all of that. But it also meant I was away from home. I could literally be right up in Carlisle one week, down to Brighton the next week. You'd have time at home in between. But that's quite tough, and I think that's got a shelf life. A lot of inspectors tend to do it for a few years and then sort of step back and take a break. And we did have a break, which was imposed on all of us, which was the pandemic, and we were all based at home and wasn't on the road anymore. And I just remember thinking, I can't imagine packing a bag and putting it in the boot and being on the road for 5 days again. And I think maybe it's time to look at something else. So again, brilliant role, brilliant job. I still do some work for them now, actually, but on an independent freelance basis. I'm a bank inspector. And I had such an amazing boss who was really a champion of coaching, and she did a lot of coaching with us all in the team. And she kind of said, if you didn't do this job, what would you do? And I said, do you know, I'd love to do a bit of training, a bit of consultancy, share some of that learning that I've got from this role. And she was like, do it. If this is something, you need to build your confidence and take the leap. So obviously the pandemic hit and the world went a little bit mad. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So my husband was on tenterhooks again, thinking, here she goes. Because he knew at this point that if I decide that something's not going to work for me anymore, I'm going to do something about it. Because I never want to be that person that is really negative about, oh, I don't want to do this, or I can't be bothered to do that. I don't want to ever lose the passion for what I do. So yeah, I'd done like little bits of training on an independent basis, and I was approached through that, doing a little bit of training by the CCG, so Coventry and Warwickshire CCG, and said, look, I don't know whether you'd be interested in this. And this was the child exploitation project. And I said, I absolutely would be. Again, I think they approached me because of my background as a police officer and my background working in substance misuse. And I said, yeah, I'd absolutely be interested, but there was a conflict of interest there if I was also working in that national role with the Care Quality Commission. So I had a choice to make. I either take the leap and the risk, or I don't. And for me, I just thought, what an opportunity to launch independently and to launch my organisation on a much bigger scale. And so I did. And I remember like ringing my boss, telling her that I got this opportunity, and she was just amazing about it, really supportive. And I just did it. I just took the leap. And I knew, again, really, I had that safety net there, because she kind of said, look, try it. If it isn't for you, if it doesn't work out, you've got a job here. So I was really lucky in that respect, but it still felt like a big leap to take, going from being employed, always having been employed, to self-employment is a big change, and it almost felt like a lifestyle change as well, but again, something that I'm really glad that I did. I trusted my gut again, and I did it. And I don't know if I would have had the tenacity and the resilience to do that if it wasn't again for my career in policing, to be perfectly honest. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's how I've come to be here. And now the organisation is going from strength to strength. I've got another kind of 2.5 years worth of work through the CCG, because we had a successful bid that I wrote and put into NHS England. And so, yeah, I feel really fortunate and really, really lucky at the moment. And I'm loving every day doing what I do.
Incredible. What a story. Can we sort of go back a fraction just to that point where you said that you were approached about this particular gig, and obviously you were still employed obviously by the CQC at that time as well. Was that approach was it through someone you know, or how was that approach actually made?
Yeah, it's interesting. So this person was is head of safeguarding at the CCG, and I worked really closely with her when I worked in substance misuse. And um, I'd been and I'd done an inspection in Coventry as well, which she was a small part of, because you speak to all different kind of organisations as part of that inspection process. And that's how she kind of knew me and had approached me to do that. And so again, it kind of felt like for me, it was a great opportunity, but it was only for a year, so it was really time limited. And so that's where the risk was, because I thought, what happens after that year? That year is going to go really fast, like a 42-week project, so not even a year. So that was the big risk for me, but it's amazing how other opportunities then just present themselves.
Well, that's where I'm going to go with this. Exactly there. So because setting yourself, there are loads of people who may be listening to the podcast or they're midway or even at the end of their career, where they've got loads and loads of experience that they know is, they would be able to market, but I guess they haven't got an idea on how to go about setting yourself up as a consultant, or how to market those skills or anything like that at all. And I guess again, it is so important, isn't it, those relationships and people in terms of getting those approaches, I guess.
Yeah.
But actually then to take that leap and go full on consultancy is a massive step. And I think there's a lot of people who have those skills but wouldn't really know how to how to go about letting people know that they've got those skills.
Do you know, it's really interesting, because I know that some people have kind of gone into consultancy and they've paid out a lot of money to business coaches and other professionals like that to kind of get them to think about a brand and get them to think about marketing and how they can put themselves out there. And I never did that, actually. I had a really firm idea in my head of where I wanted to go with it. I knew that I wanted to do consultancy in areas that I'm really passionate about, because I think if it's an area that you're passionate about, you can't go wrong, because if people sense that you're passionate and you're committed, as I say, really, that for me was the most important thing. So I didn't really think too much about branding or marketing. I just knew that I wanted to pursue topics and areas that I knew stuff about, that I was passionate about raising awareness of, and that's where I went with it. And it's just kind of like branched off from there. So, for example, LinkedIn has been an amazing platform for me. I don't do a lot of other kind of social media or advertising, and I haven't needed to, because LinkedIn is a great place to network and to get yourself out there. But I think for me, the key is about being really authentic as well. And I think that sometimes when you have all of that support, I'm sure there's plenty of people that will disagree with this, but around sort of coaching and marketing, and you can pay out all of this money, but sometimes you lose you in all of that, and you lose what you want to achieve and your authenticity. And I think if you do a lot of that yourself and you come through your sort of product and your brand, that would be my advice for anybody that wants to kind of set themselves up in this field. And as you know, from LinkedIn, all of the posts that I put out, and my posts and my kind of thoughts and about the work that I do, and that's been enough. So I suppose I've not had the time, because of how this happened all so fast, and how my sort of business is grown much faster than I ever anticipated that it would, which is a a huge positive. It can sometimes feel really overwhelming at times, and you just need to take a step back and just say, hang on a minute, I'm captain of the ship now, and I can slow it down if I need to slow it down. Because I think that that's another switch. Sometimes we're so hardwired to managing the pace and the tempo that's bestowed on us by employers that actually when you're self-employed, you forget that you're responsible for kind of your tempo. But yeah, that's how it's worked for me. I've not had that time to really overthink it, and I've just gone with it, which probably sounds like really reckless, but it has
Incredible.
worked.
I love it. I love it. I think it's just you've trusted your gut all the way through, and it's just such an amazing thing. And things always turn out the best. I always felt there was something inside me. I really enjoyed. I love my time in the police, but I always felt I knew when I left the police I was going to go on to do other things. I just didn't really know what it was.
Yeah.
And it's just you just give things a go and things always work out. It's and
they do work out.
That's that mindset thing again, I think, isn't it? But I'm going to go on to LinkedIn in a sec. But just before I do that, in terms of some of the consultancy skills and things like you mentioned that you bid for a particular gig with the NHS, and where did you learn those skills? So how did you know what to put in that document? How did you learn how to price yourself correctly and not undersell yourself and then almost be out of pocket because you're putting so many hours in? That's a real skill in itself, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's a skill that you kind of learn as you go. So, there's been projects that I've worked on and I thought I've really undersold myself there, and it's taken me a lot longer than I ever anticipated it would. And I think I'm getting better now at kind of not being almost embarrassed by putting my prices out there, if that makes sense as well. In terms of skill set to write a bid, it's the first bid that I ever wrote, and I have not got any skill set in particular, if I'm being perfectly honest, about writing a bid. I simply thought, you know what, I've been given an opportunity here to write this bid and pull this bid together, and I'm going to take it. And because if I don't take it, we're not going to get the bid. If I do take it, we've got a chance of getting the bid. And I think that's the thing as well about being a consultant. You've always got to be willing to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. A big thing for me that I've really struggled with, because it probably sounds like this has all been really smooth sailing and it really hasn't. Imposter syndrome is a massive issue for me.
Yes,
and interestingly, the more my business grows and the more positive feedback that I get from clients that I've had or practitioners and delegates that I've trained, the worse my imposter syndrome is. And I think that we can be quite blinkered and think that that only really impacts on women. And when I've spoken to other independents, males also experience that. It isn't just an issue that women kind of struggle with. I think that's part and parcel of going from working in an organisation where maybe you get that supervision and that support from the team and your supervisor to suddenly being on your own. It can feel quite an isolating and lonely place. But again, what I've done is I've built that network of people in a similar boat to me, and I've got some amazing support structures in place now. But I would say to anybody who is thinking about going independent, you need to have those support structures in place. People that you can talk to about your fears and your fears of failing or fears of not being good enough, and be really open and honest about that.
Yeah, that is so important. I've been open about this before as well in a number of posts and conversations, but exactly the same. I feel like I'm going to get found out any minute. And actually, the higher up I've gone, so in corporate world now, and it's gone incredibly well. I'm very, very lucky. But I constantly feel like I'm going to get found out, and it's a really strange sensation. I doubt a lot of what I do, and like you say, even when you get feedback and you're doing okay, it's there's something that isn't quite wired right, and I don't know whether it is because we've been hierarchical organisations previously, exactly as you say, where you do have that sort of support. And I was a skipper, and you do have that support, and you can sort of speak to your peers or some friends and colleagues and sort of go, what do you think? I don't know. You do absolutely need that support network around you. It's so important. It really is. But incredible story, Nikki. Honestly, absolutely amazing. And so we connected on LinkedIn a little while back, and it was the quality of your posts that really got my attention, and just how engaging they are, and actually quite challenging. And it'd be great if you could sort of explain a little bit about your thought processes around what you post and why you do it.
Yeah, I think really LinkedIn, as I say, I use LinkedIn quite a lot to network, and going back to the point that I made about those support structures, I've made so many really positive alliances with professionals on LinkedIn. It's been brilliant for me in terms of the content that I post. So part of the purpose and the overarching aim really of any of the consultancy and the training that I deliver is really about that kind of critical inner reflection, because obviously working in safeguarding, I think that's really important, that we're always reflective as practitioners, and that we're kind of thinking about our practice and challenging ourselves and constantly learning, and leaving our egos behind and thinking, actually, is this in the interest of young people or not? Not about whether or not actually I've been in this role for however long, and therefore I've done it how I've always done it, and that's how I will do it. And I think I take that approach to LinkedIn. So always try to be really balanced, but also try to really promote that kind of critical inquiry into topics and issues. And I post about lots of different topics on LinkedIn because I cover lots of different topics and lots of different themes as part of my work. But I think if you look at the content on my LinkedIn, you can see I'm quite vocal about policing. I'm quite passionate about policing. Are there challenges with policing? We know that there is. We know that there's issues institutionally and structurally and systematically that need to change. And we're not just talking about misogyny or racism, we're talking about all manner of things. We're talking about how policing is being cut and the huge impact of that. And often, I see that the way that the media portrayal of policing, I think, is grotesquely unfair, given that we've done it and we know the realities of it. And sometimes I think on LinkedIn, we see a lot of posts that are kind of being shared about policing, and it frustrates me when they're often shared by people who've never had that true insight into the job. And so, yeah, I think the post that you're referring to was about, the Sarah Everard case and the court case that resulted from that, and how horrific it was. But just trying to really bring back some perspective about policing and some fairness. We're not saying that there's no issues, but at the same time, this kind of narrative that all police are inherently bad and the police can't be trusted, it is really damaging and can be potentially really dangerous. So I think that's a post that you're probably referring to. Yeah.
But there is just so much good stuff out there, and you're saying that as a result of your engagement on LinkedIn, that's actually helped you as well, isn't it, in terms of the work that you're doing and the additional connections?
Definitely. And I think that when you go out on your own, I remember my first LinkedIn post and kind of putting yourself out there, and again that imposter syndrome, because there are so many brilliant professionals out there, and I've got some associates. When I look at kind of the people that I'm networked with, and they've got PhDs or they're like got MBEs, and then there's me, and they're kind of like contacting me and asking my advice or whatever, and I kind of have a moment where I think, wow, it's kind of, yeah, it's a bit overwhelming sometimes, but lovely in the same way. And I really rate LinkedIn. I don't think that I probably anticipated that I would get as much from that platform as I did, but I would really advocate to anybody that's thinking about going out on their own, just to network and see what other people are doing, and actually seeing the work that other people are doing can be quite inspiring for you, thinking about what you want to do going forward.
Yeah, definitely. So if there's anyone that wants to follow in your footsteps, are there any particular training courses, or is there any sort of direction that you would suggest that people go?
Yeah, so some of the training that I did, and I've done lots of different bits and pieces around training and further education since I left policing, but one of the best courses that I did, and I would really recommend to anybody that has been in the police, is training to become an independent reviewer. So somebody that can write those child safeguarding practice reviews in the event of a child death or a child being significantly harmed, or adult safeguarding reviews, domestic homicide reviews. So I've done training to be able to author all forms of those reviews. I did my training with the SILP school, so that's Serious Instant Learning Process, to credited by the Criminology and Criminal Justice Department at Portsmouth University. There are other courses as well, I think, that were offered, but this was particularly brilliant for me. And I think that, again, there was so much that I brought to the table from policing, and that kind of investigative skills that you learn. I'm authoring a review at the moment, and it just seems, it's my first review actually, but it still seems quite natural to me because of obviously policing, that investigative kind of role that we have, looking at all of the evidence and thinking about what that means, that complex information. So for me, that's a great way to kind of think about an exit out of policing and where to go. Really varied, gives you the opportunity to be independent, although you could maybe, if you've got a role in a local authority, they're always looking for independent reviewers. So yeah, that was a great piece of training that I did, accredited training as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So last couple of questions really. And the first one is, what do you feel when you look back on your policing career now? How do you feel about it? And is there anything that you miss?
Anything that I miss? Sometimes I think I miss, that kind of group dynamic and the friendships and that kind of bond you have with the people that you work with. I miss that because obviously I don't think that there's any role where you maybe have that and that bond because of the nature of the job that you do. When I look back, I feel incredibly proud that I was a police officer, and I've always had that sense of pride that I'm proud that I was in the police. Do I miss anything else? I think interviewing, I love interviewing, but obviously in my role now, there's still elements of interviewing that I do as part of, particularly around the independent reviewing process. Would I change anything, did you say?
No, not necessarily would you change anything, no, but would you? That wasn't what I asked, but it's a really good question.
Asking my own questions now, aren't I?
That's great, yeah.
No, I wouldn't change anything. And do you know what? I am so glad that I trusted my gut throughout all of this. And what I would say to anybody is, when people say, well, yeah, it's all right saying, oh, trust your gut, but actually as a police officer, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? When you're in the thick of it, when you're in those confrontational situations, you trust your gut, don't you, half the time? You kind of know if something's not right or is about to happen. It's that gut instinct. I think in policing, you develop that sixth sense, and you never underestimate the impact of trusting your gut and just checking in with that.
Yeah. So the final question. What would you say to that police officer back in 2012?
What would I say? I think I would say, just do it, take the risk, because actually what is life if you don't take a risk? Joining the police is a risk in so many ways, a huge risk. Probably one of the biggest risks that you can actually take because, again, of the nature of the job and the role. So just do it. And I would say, I would just say, trust your gut, I suppose, is what I would say. Always trust your gut.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nikki. Amazingly inspirational, just such a great story. And I'm just so happy for your success. It's just incredible. And I wish you every success for the future as well. So I'm sure you just go on to better and better things. Amazing.
Oh, thanks, Andy.
If people want to connect with you, Nikki, what's the best way of doing that? Obviously through LinkedIn, I'm guessing.
Through LinkedIn is a great way to connect. Also, I've got a website which is www.safer-together.co.uk. So you can always check out the website and contact me through there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Wow. I wasn't lying, was I? What a fantastic interview that was. And a huge thanks to Nikki for her time. Just so insightful, and I just love the fact that she just follows her gut and it just works every time. Incredible. So if you like what you've heard, then don't forget to join the private Facebook group. That's www.facebook.com/groups/Blue Light Leavers. And you've got the Blue Light Levers website, which is www.bluelightlevers.com. Loads of information and resources and services there for you. And thank you so much for listening. It really means so much. And if you like what you've heard, then please leave a review and click on 5 stars, and particularly on Apple. And that way just allows us to get noticed by a few more people. And it really means so much that you listen. And the feedback that I get, and actually particularly while I've been off, I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but particularly while I've been off, the feedback around the podcasts and how much they've helped, and particularly with LinkedIn, and how to really stand out in interview, had some amazing successes through that as well. So honestly, it just means so much, and I'm hugely grateful and hugely humbled to be able to speak to so many amazing people and just allow them to tell their stories to hopefully give you some inspiration that if we've done it, you can too. Thanks ever so much for listening. Really appreciate it. And speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye for now.